You're listening to Cinema Rex. It is an Iranian film podcast. Episode 13, Abbas Kiarostami's Through the Olive Trees.
Well, because I think in Persian, if you were to say through the olive tree, they'd be like, you walked through a tree?
Yeah. But through trees, you can walk through trees. You can walk through a forest.
But in Persian, you wouldn't say that. You would say, you could say between the olive trees. But then the English version of that almost sounds like you're standing between two of them.
Right.
I understand why they did it this way.
Durud bar shoma dustan aziz. This is the Cinema Rex podcast where we talk all things film and television and comedy. And what else do we talk about, Farhan?
Plumbing, taxes, hunting.
Plumbing, taxes, hunting.
Spaghetti.
Everything. I'm Kaveh Mohebi.
And I'm Farhan Moradi.
And let's just dive into talking about Through the Olive Trees.
Zire derakhtan zeytun.
There we go. Zire derakhtan. Yeah, Zire derakhtan zeytun. So under would be the literal translation, but through is the one that makes more sense. The books I have both versions, like a social history of Iranian cinema. In one chapter they call it one, and in the next chapter they call it the other.
They covered all their bases.
Well, it's the third in the Coker trilogy. We're not going to do like how was your week?
How was your week, Kaveh?
It was okay.
It sounds like you want me to ask about it.
No, it was fine. We're just general banter before we start. I've got fun fact trivia to ask you.
Hit me.
True or false? The two main leads in Where is the Friend's House? The main kid who's looking for his friend and the friend are related. True or false?
True. They're brothers.
Yes. Did you know this?
I did. I realized this when I was watching the movie.
We never brought it up in the...
We didn't. I only found this out today. Or no, not today. Yesterday.
Yeah, that's interesting. That could go into correction corner because we missed it entirely. It's an interesting fact.
Yeah.
That those two are brothers. The brother who loses his book, who's not in the film that much, his real name is Ahmed Ahmedpour.
Yeah, which is the name that they give to the main character.
Yeah.
Which is so funny.
So yeah, today we're doing the third in the Coker trilogy, Through the Olive Trees, Under the Olive Trees, Zir Derakhtan Zeytun. This is our fourth Kiarostami film out of 13 episodes, so clearly a very Kiarostami heavy journey so far, but I think it's appropriate considering his landmark, his thumbprint in Iranian cinema.
Is that the word?
No, there's another word, like someone who leaves their
mark?
You leave your mark.
Yeah.
Their mark, I guess. Landmark is not the right term. Should I jump into plot summary?
Sure.
Hossein, a local stonemason, is working as a production assistant on Kiarostami's latest film, Life and Nothing More, when he's suddenly given the chance to play a small but pivotal role in the film. But his crucial scene is jeopardized when he has to perform alongside the woman he'd recently made a marriage proposal to, a student named Tahireh, who was orphaned by the earthquakes in Koker. Because he's poor and illiterate, the girl's family finds his offer insulting. The girl avoids him as a result. She continues evading him even when they are filming, as she seems to have trouble grasping the difference between the role in the film and her real-life self. The situation complicates further as Hossein still pursues the affections of the young actress while the film goes on. The director of this film, a stand-in for Kiarostami, played by legendary Iranian actor Mohammad Ali Keshavarz, learns about this and struggles to complete his film, advising Hossein about what to do, while finding a way to break through the tension between his two actors. Hossein is adamant that Tahireh has feelings for him, but is afraid of her grandmother's resentment towards him, and that if he can simply get an answer, whether it be a yes or no, he would be able to put the issue to rest. The girl manages to finish the scene with Hossein, while Hossein woos her, and then departs by walking as Hossein runs to follow her, where in the final scene, at a great distance, the girl finally gives an answer to Hossein, and we are left with him running through a green field and back to the olive grove. Through the Olive Trees has a Rotten Tomato score of 87% and an audience score of 89%. So Farhan, I ask you, what did you think of Through the Olive Trees?
I liked it a lot. I really liked it.
I did too.
Yeah, you texted me and you were like, oh, it's so good. I'm so excited to talk about it.
Well, can I just jump in first before? I know I just asked you, but I want your feedback on this thing specifically.
Like, what do you think of this? Let me tell you what I think.
Let me tell you. Because watching this film, we'd mentioned this before in the podcast. I think it's true for both of us. There's the one film in the Coker trilogy I'd never seen. So in doing this podcast, the other two films, the first two I'd seen many times before. Me too. And they were a rewatch. And it was upon watching this film that, to me, I really solidified the trilogy-ness of the Coker trilogy. to me, it became clear that when people talk about this as a trilogy, I always kind of thought of it as like a thematic spiritual trilogy, where it's like, oh, they're all about death or life or rebirth or whatever. But I genuinely see this as a true trilogy in the fact that this is the continuation of some of these characters' lives and stories. It is a bit of that Inception thing of one step removed and then another step even further removed. But it's almost like if you want to find out the results of what happened to some of the characters in the second film, you'll have to watch the third film to see whether or not they turned out okay. Right?
Yeah.
You literally get the answer to And Life Goes On as to whether or not Ahmadpour is okay by watching the next film.
Yeah.
There you will get your answer. So it genuinely does have this linear sort of device of watch these 3 films to get the bigger picture of what the story is. And I thought it really made me happy. It had that shared universe, the thing that Kevin Smith is very famous for in the Jay and Silent Bob movies. Have you seen many Jay and Silent Bob movies, Kevin Smith films?
Long time ago.
Clerks and Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back and Mallrats and Chasing Amy.
Yeah.
These characters sort of reappear in one another's films so that it's kind of like, though they might be side characters in the next film, you actually get a better sense of how their storyline ended in that film by watching the next film. They're secondary characters in future films, but they might have been the protagonist of one film. So truly, Kiarostami is just aping Kevin Smith's style.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. But it's cool. It's got that shared universe thing. He's doing the Marvel universe thing before the MCU did it, which I love.
Yeah, this is the beginning of Marvel. You have Kiarostami to thank for it.
Yeah, the post-credit scene will blow your mind when Samuel Jackson shows up to Kiarostami and says, I want to start the Coker Initiative.
I can confirm I watched through the end of the credits. There was no scene after the credits.
I just read an interview I did with him in the summer of '97, and I asked him, do you mind people calling these 3 films the Coker Trilogy? And he said, no, I don't. And I do know that he kind of came to accept the term reluctantly and gradually. And I think that's because, obviously, A, he didn't set out to make a trilogy, and B, he didn't coin that term. Somebody else did. It just sort of came into the atmosphere. But he didn't reject it. And, he said to me, well, these 3 films are just connected by the accident of place. I sort of disagree with him saying the accident of place because, first of all, it was no accident. He went to this place 3 times intentionally, and he created a lot of meaning around this place, and the films create a lot of meaning around this place. It's a very organic thing.
I took it away, but you tell me your thoughts, and then I'll add to it.
Similar to what you said, I really like that the movie keeps taking a step back. Just to clarify for people who haven't seen them but like to listen to the podcast, the first movie that we reviewed of Kiarostami's, Where's the Friend's House, is the story about the kid trying to return the workbook of his classmate, right? Or the textbook. And he's going from one town to the other.
Right.
The second Coker Trilogy movie, Life and Nothing More, it's a movie about this fictional director who made Where's the Friend's House, trying to return to the village where the movie was made, the last movie was made, after an earthquake to see if he can find these kids. And the movie ends and he's going towards the silhouette of these 2 brothers who you think are likely the kids from the first movie, but you still don't see the final answer to that. And then this movie is about an actor playing a director.
Played by yet another person.
Directing the fictional director of the last movie, who's making a movie about making the first movie. So it's like making a movie about making a movie about making a movie. And this movie even starts with Kaveh. Do you want to talk about your Kaveh's opening shot cornered moment?
Yeah, I mean, I even made the note that this film starts with stripping the film of all subtext, essentially. And the most famous actor that Kiarostami has worked with thus far up until this point in his career is Muhammad Ali Keshavaz, who was very legendary at the time of this. And so it's like he's showing up on the screen, looking right at the camera and saying, hi, I am the director of this film. And we are auditioning for a scene in this.
No. He says, I'm the actor Muhammad Ali Keshavaz.
That's right. Yeah,
and I'm playing the director in this movie.
Yeah. That exactly. Yes. Yeah, that's
about
right.
About the making of another movie. Yeah. And we are currently here looking for the main actor of this movie.
I actually chuckled when that scene happened because I just instantly was like, all right, he's truly doing something different every film. And this one, he's just like, all right, F it. I'm just going to strip it all of subtext. And here's the main character introducing him his real life name that he's going to be playing it's just really funny. I liked it a lot.
It almost felt like, you know, when you go see a movie at a film festival, and sometimes a director and actor will come up to the front and be like, "Hi, I'm so and so. I did this and that on this movie. Thanks a lot for coming. Enjoy the film." Like, it almost feels like that in some way.
Yeah.
But I love that right off the bat, it already starts like 4 or 5 steps removed from where we started. And then it dives in, and then it dives in. Like, it continuously like dances in and out of what is fiction, what is real.
Well, and it's that again, it's like the Inception thing of once, you know, where they go into the guy's dream, and then in the dream they have to go into another guy's dream. You remember that thing of time keeps getting slower and slower, so that they're in a dream within a dream within a dream. Mm-hmm, He's doing this with like the films, obviously doing it way before Inception. Also introducing the film, it kind of reminds me like Woody Allen used to do a lot of those in his films. Like he sort of like start the film with like Annie Hall starts with him talking to the camera and telling a few jokes and stuff.
I don't really remember Annie Hall very much, and I refuse to go back and watch any Woody Allen movies now.
That's fair. You're well within your right. There's then that scene. He starts kind of like auditioning the women that he's going to play for the role. But this is also a callback to, because we've done the behind the scenes and talked about this. I recognize this is like, oh, this is stripped right from real life events. When he auditions one of the women and he asks her like, you know, I asked you to, or like, no, it's later on. She's like, I asked you to wear a little bit more peasant clothes, and she's like, I went shopping to buy this outfit. And it's like, no, you're supposed to be wearing peasant clothes. You remember Tahare?
Yeah, she gets it from her friend.
Yeah.
She gets like a nice dress from her friend, or a nice skirt from her friend, and she's like, "What is this?"
And the AD, that first AD or the female AD is like, you were supposed to be wearing peasant clothes. That's stripped right from And Life Goes On. Because remember in the behind the scenes when he would interview some of these people in the earthquake in the Coca, he'd ask them if they have dustier clothes to wear. But all these like citizens, they're not even actors. All these people in Coca had heard that Kiarostami was coming to direct them, so they put on their best clothes. And Abbas Kiarostami was like, "No, you guys look too like well dressed. I wanted to see like what were you wearing when the earthquake happened? Like, wear the dustier clothes." And none of them wanted to wear their dustier clothes because they were going to be filmed, and they just want. So it's just that is totally a nod to his experience of making And Life Goes On.
Well, and I think also Shiva, like the character who plays kind of the assistant director / continuity person / producer.
Yeah,
and I think she's a director in her own right. Like in the film, her character, I think. At the beginning of the movie, when she's having the conversation with the teacher character from the first movie, he mentions to her, "Oh, and maybe one day I'll get to be in one of your movies." Right? Mm-hmm. So that tells me that, oh, she's also a filmmaker in her own right. Mm-hmm. But I think I think that character, the character Shiva, is a reference to the filmmaker who actually worked with Kiarostami, who we actually see in Life Goes On, who runs in with the clipboard.
Yeah, I thought it might be her, or a reference to her at least. So then after that scene when they find the lead that they're going to play, they essentially get Tahare. You see the woman get in the car and she's driving the set, and she pulls over, and who does she see? Ahmadpour shows up, the lead of Where's the Friend's House? And he's looking much older. I like that you've seen them grow up. And he's there with his brother, who was he played the Mohammad Reza Nematzadeh.
Yeah, Nematzadeh. Ahmadpour and Babak Ahmadpour.
So, I like that again, just the reveal of the shared universe, and here they are. Like the question as to whether or not they survived is right there, and he's holding a flower. I instantly felt at home seeing him, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's like seeing an old friend in a weird way, especially because I don't know, doing this podcast and stuff. And it's like, oh, look how much he's grown. Did you not get that feeling of like he's so much older looking? I'm like, oh wow, look at you, you've grown up. I really liked it.
Kaveh, where is the friend's house? It's when you see two friends that you haven't seen for a long time returning healthy and much older.
See, he's even answering the question.
That is the friend's house.
He's answering the question to the first film. So then the first AD, Shiva, she picks up our new lead because the first actor the first actor they get is got a stutter when he talks to women, so he can't complete the scene.
I found that so cute.
Yeah, it's very cute. He's a very charming actor. So the Kiarostami stand-in, played by Keshavarz, tells Shiva to go get Hossein he's a PA working on set, and they drive him, and he's like, Hossein is told that he's going to be playing this role, and in the car they're driving and they realize that the route to the set is blocked off from some construction and people are moving some stones around, and Hossein tells the AD he won't do masonry work. He'll be an actor for the set, but he won't move bricks. And Shiva's like pretty offended by this because this guy kind of feels like almost like that stuff's beneath him now. And, you know, Shiva...
That's how it's presented. That's how it's presented.
Yeah, exactly. That's how Shiva's receiving this information.
Yeah.
And so when she asks someone for directions, Hossein says, you could have asked me. I know I am from Kokar. I know this area like the back of my hand. And she's like, well, I didn't want to bother you, seeing as how you won't do masonry work either. You probably don't want to give people directions either. You're an actor now. And that's a really interesting moment because there's a pretty important payoff later on in that. Do you want to talk about what the payoff is?
Yeah, I mean, if it's what I'm thinking of, are you talking about when he tells the director why he doesn't do it, or are you talking about when he brings it up the third time with Tahereh?
Yeah, I was talking about the second time because...
Yeah, so the second time when he brings it up with the director, he talks about how, you know, nobody respected him because he didn't have a home, he wasn't literate, all this stuff. So his thinking was, well, if I can work as a stonemason long enough, then I can have a good job, I can make the money, I can afford to have my own house, all this stuff. But he found that people were still disrespecting him and treating him super poorly. So he was kind of like, well, what is the point of me doing all this if at the end of it all, I'm still going to be disrespected? And even after the earthquake happened and everyone lost their homes, his thinking was, oh, well, we're all on the same level now, right? Like none of us own a home.
Yeah.
And people would respond to him and be like, what are you, blind? Like, do you not see that everyone's having their houses rebuilt? You'll never have a house.
Yeah.
And he was really insulted by it.
Well, and it speaks towards the classism of this guy. You later, and you're hitting the nail on the head, but just the specific thing I caught, like attached myself to was you're learning that it's specifically because he's a mason worker, like he does masonry work, that the grandmother was like, you're beneath our family. You can't marry into our family. You are a working class guy. And so he's now associating that work with like that memory of, I can't be this anymore because I want to marry her and that brings me lower. That makes me beneath them. So it's not just a pride thing. It's a very personal thing of like where he stands and the woman he loves. He can't marry because he's a mason worker.
Yeah. And then the third time he brings it up, it's when he's pleading with Tahereh to marry him. Because just off camera, they're like, we can't ask this guy to come help us because he refuses to do masonry work. And then he's like, yeah, sorry, guys, I won't do it. And then he turns to her and privately, he's like, but I would do it for you.
Exactly. Yeah,
it's like, I would do anything for you. And it's,
it's very sweet.
Very sweet. Which is also kind of like, even just his little story arc with masonry is almost presented in the same way that these three films are. Because each time you find out a little more about it, it's like taking a step back and taking a step back.
Yeah, it's great. That's a good, very perceptive of you. I like that.
One thing I want to point out, the bulk of this movie takes place around them making one of the scenes from the second Kokar film.
Yeah.
Which is the whole story of the young groom who says, and it might have been my favorite scene, I think, It was my favorite scene, yeah. Where he mentions, we just got married. We got married the day after the earthquake. We used some plastic that we were going to use to make like a little greenhouse. We pulled it over ourselves, made a tent, and that was where we did the wedding. So this whole film is built around the making of that one scene about these two newlyweds. And what we don't know is that those two newlyweds, the actors who are playing them, the guy has been chasing after this girl for years. And he's wanted to marry her. He's wanted to ask for her hand in marriage. And the woman's parents just died in the earthquake. And now her grandmother is who he has to go to get consent. And she's even more difficult to convince. Even though she's also uneducated, she's like, you're uneducated. You're not good enough for my granddaughter, all this stuff. And the granddaughter won't talk to him. Because for a lot of women, it's established at another point in the film that a lot of young women in this neighborhood don't speak to men.
Yeah.
And I think it's a matter of respect and custom and whatever. So the fact that he's doing this, it would almost break custom for her to give him the answer. The custom would be he would have to go get permission from the family.
Yeah.
But at some point, she sees him in a cemetery and gives him a look that he perceives to be a look of interest. And so from that point on, he has constantly been trying to go after her and convince her to marry him.
Other scenes of note?
Yeah, the scene that they're trying to recreate from the second movie, I really liked it because if you think about it, Kiarostami is behind the camera, right? And he's directing this director-actor who's behind his own camera.
Yeah.
And that guy is directing the actor who plays a director from the first movie also on camera. So there's a point where you're basically seeing like from one director to the other director to the other director all on screen. And the Ahmadpours are also in the scene.
Yeah, that's right.
So in one scene, you get 4 layers of this. And I just find it really interesting. And you can't do that with one movie. That the setup for that is 3 movies deep, right?
That's right.
And I think it's hard to pull something like that off.
A lot of this film feels like it's rewarding you for your commitment to 3 movies thus far.
Yeah.
I understand this film could be watched in a vacuum on its own, but you are, if someone went into seeing Through the Olive Trees in a vacuum, hasn't seen anything else previous to it, they might enjoy the love story there. But how much of that film is being, like, how much of the subtext of that film is being stripped away from them without having seen the previous films, right? Like, it's a significant amount. Yeah.
Yeah, especially because they don't really get into where's the friend's house in this one.
Yeah.
Most of what they get into with this one is Life and Nothing More, and Life Goes On.
Yeah.
Right? And Life Goes On dives into where's the friend's house.
Yeah.
So each one really only goes 1 step back, but to get 2 steps back, you need to actually know who those characters are already. There's a couple references to it, but they could be throwaway lines. Like, it's not like the movie stops to address it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But also just having, like, seeing Ahmadpour return, if you haven't seen the previous films, that moment means nothing to you. Like seeing him in the window. But with the context of the first and second film, that film says so much and it means everything.
Yes, yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of people probably, people who might have been festival fans at the time, this came out in 94. There's a large portion of people that probably just went to TIFF and saw this film in a vacuum and hadn't seen his previous films, There's probably a large contingent of people who watch this film for the first time. And it's just interesting how this film rewards you for following the thread.
Yeah, I would strongly advise anyone who's listening to this, if you want to watch these Coker films, to watch them in order.
Yeah.
It's much more enjoyable if you do watch them in order.
Yeah.
A couple of other things of note that I wrote down. Remember how you were talking about, everyone wants to wear their nicer clothes?
Yeah.
There's a lot of little things in this movie that I think, especially as a filmmaker, you'll appreciate a lot more. So, for example, everyone constantly telling the assistant director how to do it. And she's like, no, what? No, this isn't a negotiation. That's not how this works. I tell you to do something and you do it. Especially as the assistant director, that person cannot consult on these creative differences, on these creative changes. If there's one person that you can do that with, it's the director. So for the director to send the assistant director to be like, hey, go get this person, tell this person to do this, whatever. And then she gets there and they're constantly trying to negotiate with her.
Yeah.
She's like, you're all driving me insane.
Yeah.
Which I thought was hilarious. But then later, some of them have the same conversation with the director. And the director is more lenient and he's more willing to hear them out because he's in a position to creatively make those changes if need be, right?
Then moving forward a bit, I wanted to mention that you notice the crew living in tents while they're on set in like the hillside just off of Coker.
Yeah.
And you meet,
or just on a cot with no tent.
Yeah. And you meet the and I couldn't remember his name right now, but you meet sort of the essentially the caterer of the set, which is a guy who makes food for them.
Bagheri.
Yeah. Is that his character's name?
Yeah, Mr. Bagheri.
And I like the one part is like the director, Muhammad Ali, asks, who's playing Kiarostami, essentially asks him, how'd you sleep last night? And he goes, I couldn't sleep all night because Hossein keeps talking in his sleep. He keeps talking about white socks. in his sleep. I couldn't get sleep. And you realize, and I'd forgotten at the time, but then you realize in the later scene, those are his lines in the film. So he's so hyper focused on getting his lines right that he's like now saying them in his sleep really loudly, which is causing the caterer guy essentially to not get sleep.
Yeah.
That's such a fun, cute little moment.
Speaking of the cook, I love there's a line where the director says to him, "Isn't your wife jealous that you're the better cook?" I thought that was fun.
To which he says no, because she's dead. She died in the earthquake too. It's so sad.
It's like, it's crazy how nonchalantly people talk about that.
Yeah, yeah.
Like everyone that they talk about, they're like, "Oh no, that person died in the earthquake." Like it's just such a normal thing.
Yeah.
And I remember growing up, my parents talking about earthquakes like they were just a common occurrence in their lives. My dad was telling me yesterday that the first time he experienced an earthquake, he was like 5 years old. It was in the middle of the night.
Wow.
It's crazy. It's a whole other world.
Move forward. Should I go on to the next thing I wanted to get your thoughts on?
Yeah. Hit me with your next one.
Then they're driving to the set the next day, and the director decides to give a ride to a bunch of women who are walking along the route. And you realize that at one point he's just enchanted by one of the young girl's beautiful green eyes. And you realize in this moment he's casting for the scene in And Life Goes On, the two young girls who are washing dishes by the water.
Yeah.
And he says, I'd love to have your daughter in a scene. And the mother doesn't want it. But again, it's that like, it's almost like the behind the scenes of the making of the previous film. It's the same actress, quote unquote actress. The same villager has returned. Again, she's a couple years older. But in the reality of the film, it's supposed to be he's casting for that scene. That woman, the beautiful bright, is it green or like clear blue eyes or something she has?
Yeah, she's supposed to be playing Nematzade's. No, not Nematzadeh.
No.
The other guy's, the other person's sister.
No, I thought it was supposed to be the two women they just see washing the dishes.
Yeah. The one with the green eyes is the sister of the kid that they give a ride to.
I see. Okay.
That's why he wants her, is because the other kid also had bright eyes.
I see. So it made me wonder how much of the scenes you're saying, like, did it actually go down this way in Life Goes On? Like, did he meet those characters offering them a ride and stuff?
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting to think about.
And there's a scene because Hussein's sitting there in a truck and someone suggests he marries the green-eyed girl and he doesn't want to because she's illiterate like he is.
Yeah.
And I really like that point because on one hand it's hypocritical, but on the other hand he's being logical about who's going to raise the children if both of us are illiterate.
Yeah. He expounds on it a little bit more later in the film.
I think we're both going to bring it up later, right?
Okay, yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
That's funny to think that it's for both of us.
Yeah. I was going to say he offers to do masonry work for the love of his life, which you mentioned, which I think is very sweet. We know at this point that he hates masonry work, but he goes, "I will rebuild your house for us." And it's very sweet.
To Shiva's point, Shiva is the assistant director / producer / continuity person. When she says, "You said you don't carry plaster and you said you don't do masonry," I thought if I asked you for directions, you would say that's not my job. Yeah. So to her point on that, there are often times on film sets, especially on indie film sets, where if you're working with crew that almost strictly do union work, if you ask them for help with something else, they get really upset, right? So it seems like Shiva is definitely that type of person where she's like, this is an indie production. We all pull our weight and help others with their weight, right? Help others with their load.
Yeah.
And in her mind, the response that she gets from the boy is he's being a bit of a quote unquote diva, where he's like, "Oh, I'm an actor. I don't do that."
The turning of the page scene, I loved it. He essentially sitting there between takes talking to Tare and saying, "Listen, I know you can't talk to me, but if you have any love for me, if you love me the same way I love you, just turn a page in that book that you're reading." Because she's ignoring him the whole time and she's just sort of reading this book. And I have to say that for my monies, that's some of the most edge of your seat tension and drama that I've felt in a long time in a movie, because he's just saying, just turn the page if you love me. And you see her reading and all of a sudden she reaches her hand. She like kind of half turns the page, but then doesn't. Oh no, she's about to.
She does it a couple times.
And then when she's about to actually turn the page, the director calls in to like say, prepare for the next scene. So it cuts in, interrupts it. But at the same point too, at any moment, you could just consider it, she's reading the book. Maybe she's really not listening to him and she could just be about to turn a page. So I love the use of this sort of like tension of, is she going to turn the page? And there's so much meaning and drama behind it. I really love that scene.
Yeah, me too.
Oh yeah. Okay. So I really like this. Towards the end, near the end of the film, you kind of have them all finish that. They finally get the shot they need for them putting on the socks, talking about, and they're all returning to like end the day, or they're going to go to their next set. And you have the two boys sit on the truck, and Hossein and Tahir sit in the truck waiting to go. And in that one shot, it just stands there, and you hear the people, the crew members, kind of arguing about something in the background, but the camera just lands on them. And in this one shot by the truck, you have the characters of the first film in the Coker trilogy and the actors of the last film of the Coker trilogy sitting there side by side in the same truck. And I thought it was like a really nice image. Did you catch that moment?
Yeah.
I really like that moment.
Yeah, it was nice. And also when the crew is arguing off camera about wanting to use the truck to lug their gear up the hill.
Yeah.
And then Tahir gets out of the car, she grabs the flower, and she's like, I'm just going to walk, right?
Yeah.
And she leaves. The boy is like, hey, Tahir is leaving. And then the director goes over to him and he's like, hey, can't you see we're all arguing about using the truck? You're a young guy. Why don't you just walk?
Yeah.
He's not actually saying that. I think he's trying to shepherd him towards the girl.
Oh,
I think he's
interesting.
trying.
Yeah.
I genuinely, you didn't think so?
I didn't catch that line. I was.
I absolutely think that, because he sees it and then he walks over and he tells him. I think
the director says that, right?
Yeah.
And then he follows them.
Yes, then he follows them.
Yeah.
And the end of the film is this very long shot from the point of view of the director at the top of the hill, watching these two characters walk through the olive trees, walk through through some tall grass. They walk through a field, and we're just watching this scene.
Yeah.
And he's chasing after and all this stuff, gets the answer, and then he runs back, and it's all one shot, and it's super far away because they start closer, but as they keep going, it gets further and further and further, and it's not zooming either. Like they're almost specks on the screen at that point.
Yeah.
And then gives him the answer, and then he runs back.
Yeah.
That's from the point of view of the director, and I think that was absolutely the director trying to shepherd him towards her.
Yeah, I totally buy that. I think that's a good estimation. And also in that moment, you see the zigzag trail once again for a third time. You know that, but this time the hill is surrounded with green grass. Like it's like almost like another season. It doesn't look like the dirt mound it once did. It's kind of got some forestry is growing. I like that image too.
Which does kind of break the illusion from the second film.
How do you mean?
Because it's not that overgrown in the second one.
Right. Yeah. Oh, you're right. Yeah, you're right.
But I like it because in a meta sense, it's like, oh, Harmony is returning to this area.
Yeah. And just kind of speaking on this final thing, and then we can move to behind the scenes trivia, unless you have more things. I'll come back to this later on, but I think the last 12 minutes of this movie might be Kiarostami's best directing. It might be his best work in his career, in my opinion. From the moment the director tells him to follow her, and then there's a long argument scene when they're walking through those trees in the wooded area, which is where
you're saying argument.
The one-sided argument where he's like, because at one point he's like, for God's sakes, just give me an answer. And this entire film, she's been silent towards him, and it's just like he's getting. So it's like it kind of felt like an argument to me because he's just like it's like his last-ditch effort, and he's giving it his all. But then that long shot. I just think it's really powerful and really good ending. And we can get into specific later, but that's my personal taste of like, damn, this is some of Kiarostami's best work.
Yeah.
Those last 12 minutes. Any other thoughts, scenes you liked?
Going back to what you just said about that scene, how he talks about, the director even agrees with some of these things, and he's made some valid points, and he's from the city, like he's educated.
Yeah.
He's from Tehran.
Yeah.
Like I love that to all these people who live in rural parts of the country. When the city comes up, they're like, wow, this guy's like a big deal. He's been to the city.
Yeah.
He's educated. We see this in The Cow as well.
Yeah.
Where the one character who goes to the city and comes back, everyone respects him so much. I think it's an interesting juxtaposition to No Bears, where a lot of characters almost don't respect the city people, right? Mm-hmm. There's the one kid who goes to the city and he comes back. And they're like, oh, this guy, he comes back from the city and he thinks he can steal my girl, all this stuff. And then also Panahi's character, they're all like, oh, Aghay Mohandes, whatever. And at first they're saying it to him in a way of respect, but later it's very patronizing the way they say it to him.
Yeah.
And in this movie, I feel like you can kind of see that shift, especially in the younger generation, where they're like, hey, we don't dress like that anymore. Illiterate people dress like that and old people dress like that.
Yeah.
The rest of us don't dress like that. That's not who we are. You have your own view of things, which is stereotypical and it's inaccurate. Or when the director character keeps insisting that Tahira calls her quote unquote husband Mr., right?
Yeah.
Or Sir.
Yeah.
And then he goes over to him and he's like, actually, that's not customary anymore.
Yeah.
We don't do that anymore.
Yeah. He's almost working as a cultural consultant for the Coker area as well.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say, I like that Hossein also works as not just the actor, but he like is still the PA, so he has to serve them all tea between takes and stuff too. So he's like cultural consultant. He's the PA bringing them tea between shots, and the actor in the scene. Like he still has to do it all, which is really fun.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes in trivia.
I have a few. Do you want me to go first, and then whatever I miss, you can bring up?
Yeah.
So the first scene that we see them filming, when it shows all the extras kind of sitting around waiting for their scene to come up. Not the kids who are behind the yellow line, but as the camera moves past the crew, we see a bunch of the extras waiting to do their scenes. There's an extra in the background who's dressed like the guy in the split portrait from the second movie.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's also the poster for the second movie.
Yeah.
One of the extras in the background is dressed exactly like that guy. Another one I have is one of the names of the crew. His name is Mr. Panahi. And Panahi was involved in the making of this movie.
Yeah, Panahi was the AD of this film. Was Kiarostami's assistant director.
Okay, yeah. And he's also in the movie.
Yeah, he's one of the crew members sort of in the background at some point, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to recognize him because he's so much younger.
Yeah.
He's got
I didn't recognize him. I just know he's in it and he's credited on IMDb, but not credited in real life.
I think he was the real life assistant director of this film. First AD, but then in the film, within the film, he's just a crew member, like first camera assistant or something. Like he's just something there. And there's a few shots of him, but he's so hard to recognize because he's so much younger. He's got the jet black hair, and I think he's got a mustache too. So it's almost like when you look at a photo of.
Oh, is that him?
Yeah, he's one of those guys. Yeah, and he's not in every. He's not in every shot they show, but yeah. So Jafar Panahi, he's in this film.
Yeah. Okay, here's another one. This one's kind of fun. There's a scene where this old lady is talking about their village and why they still live in the village that's kind of been falling apart after the earthquake. And she mentions, yeah, we have water, we have crops, we have this, we have that. And then she says, we have flies. And then he's like, you have flies? And then she's like, yeah, honey flies. So I asked my mom, I was like, hey, in Mazandarani, because they're in Gilan, right? And their languages are very similar. They're basically just dialects of each other. I was like, how do you say bee in Mazandarani? And I knew one of them, and there's a colloquial one, which is mother-in-law, as like it's kind of like tongue-in-cheek. But then there's three other kinds that you would say throughout the rest of Mazandaran. So there's, for a regular bee, you would say zemzem, which is kind of like an automatopoeia, right?
Yeah.
And then for a honeybee, you would say asel maz for honeybee.
Okay.
Like specifically the ones that produce honey. And then for a fly, you would say kurmaz. So asel maz and kurmaz. It's like an interesting mistranslation for her where she's just saying moths for short.
Yeah.
And contextually, you would assume that she's talking about bees, right? But then when he's like, wait, fly? What are you talking about? She's like, no, whatever. Because she's trying to translate it to Farsi, right? Because Farsi's not their first language. I just thought that was kind of cute. Here's another one. Kiarostami is actually in one of the scenes.
Yes.
And it's when they're shooting the scene in the olive trees where the main character from the second movie finds the baby and he's shushing her.
Yeah.
And did you realize who's not in that scene?
No.
Muhammad Ali Keshavarz, the guy who plays the director.
I thought he was.
No, I don't think so.
Because
I didn't see him. I looked for him too. It's literally just Kiarostami standing in as the director.
Well, apparently, from what I'd heard in the interviews with the two critics that were talking about this on the Criterion thing, it's all three directors are in that shot. And when it pans really quickly, at one point you see Abbas, you see Farhad Karadmand, who played the stand-in director in And Life Goes On, and at one point Muhammad. So apparently when the camera, because it's a quick pan too, right?
Yeah.
They don't really stand them. Those two guys said that you can see all three directors. That's like supposed to be like a little bit of an Easter egg. Like if it's a YouTube video, there'd be like the red circle with the arrow pointing at things you miss.
Yeah.
Apparently all 3 directors are there discussing things. I couldn't see the other 2 as well, but that's what I was told.
No, he's not in it.
Okay, then maybe they were mistaken.
Yeah, they're mistaken. Because I specifically called that out because I thought it was interesting that Kiarostami is standing in as the director.
Yeah.
And it's this one time. It's the only time in the movie that you see him, and it's the only time in the movie that he's basically playing himself.
Yeah.
Which is such a like fourth wall breaky thing.
Yeah.
And I love that he does this because you know that he's doing it because he's like a little boy being like tee hee hee.
Yeah.
Like, playing these little jokes as he's going along. Mm-hmm. I thought it was funny.
Yeah. Well,
so that's it for mine.
First thing I'll say is, and I heard this because I can't read Farsi, I'm illiterate in Farsi, but hearing this from the Criterion collection interviews, you know, the clapboard that whenever they're doing that scene, that scene they repeat 100 times.
Yeah.
You know what that clapboard says?
What?
The film, Through the Olive Trees. It doesn't say And Life Goes On.
Oh, that's funny.
And every time they show it, scene 2, take 3, whatever, that clapboard is saying Through the Olive Trees.
The olive trees.
And
that's
so
funny.
people are like,
are they using the actual slate?
Yes, I think so. And so the thing is, people are saying, oh, is that a mistake Kiarostami made? Like using the, it's like, I don't think so. It's pretty blatantly there. It's just another winking tongue-in-cheek thing of like, the film that in the scene they're shooting is a scene from And Life Goes On. But the clapboard we're seeing in between is for this actual film we're watching. So again, he's removing, it's another like fourth wall breaking tongue-in-cheek thing.
It's so funny.
That's very funny. According to the book Close Up, Iranian Cinema, Past, Present, and Future, among the rubble of the earthquake in Kokar, Kiarostami noted a budding love between 2 of the young residents who he had filmed in Life and Nothing More. It was a play on the on-screen, off-screen variations of that love story, which became the content of Zira Daraktan Zaytun. So he saw like whether or not it's those 2 actually in real life, he was actually filming. Like this event took place. He noticed 2 of the actors kind of having a budding romance and kind of came up with the story and built on it from there. So he was inspired by a real life romance that was taking place on set. It's the first film in which Abbas Kiarostami has hired a professional actor to play a role, and that's Mohammad Ali Keshavaz to the director of the film within the film.
Do you know what his first movie was?
Mohammad Ali Keshavaz?
Yeah.
On Night of the Hunchback?
Yeah, Night of the Hunchback.
Yeah, I know. He's a great actor. It is the first film which is officially submitted to the Academy by Iran after the Islamic Revolution in Iran, selected as Iran's submission in Best Foreign Language Film category for the 1995 Oscars. Ahmad Kiarostami, who is the son of Abbas Kiarostami, spoke about his father and said his father was never a cinephile and he didn't watch a lot of films, partially because he didn't want to copy other people's styles. He would say, I get my inspiration from life, not cinema. So Abbas Kiarostami, according to his son, was not a cinephile.
That's fascinating.
When he made Where is the Friend's House, he didn't plan on making more films on the topic, and then the earthquake happened. A lot of the topics of the film came from conversations between Abbas and Bahman. Bahman is the older son, the other brother. So similar to the famous ripping of the photo in Where's the Friend's House, the philosophy of poor people and rich people living in houses together was a philosophy that Abbas had said to Hossein, the actor, off stage. Then he told the DP the next day, oh, Hossein has this great thing about rich people and poor people. Hossein, tell the DP that thing you said. And Hossein was like, I didn't say that. Abbas is like, no, just tell him anyways. That thing you said, it was so great. Just do it in your own words. So now in that scene in the truck, when he's talking about illiterate people marrying rich people, it's Hossein repeating Abbas's words, but Abbas had sort of done this sort of like puppeteer thing of saying, tell the DP that great thing you were saying. So he's not really memorizing lines or scripts. He's sort of repeating this thing that he remembers Abbas saying. It's very interesting.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
That's such an interesting way to get actors to say something in their own words.
Yeah. I could see your gears are grinding of like, you're like, how can I use this? This is good.
The thing is, like, it's also not as harmful as some of the other manipulating things that he's done.
No, it's kind of,
it's not going to lead to trauma.
And then this is a little bit of correction corner, but like Ahmad Kiarostami said this in the interview, which I thought was interesting. In The Wind Will Carry Us, Abbas Kiarostami was really upset that the crew kept sleeping in because Abbas would wake up really early in the mornings. And so he woke up early and the crew was always sleeping in. So he cut him out of the film. So those, the rest of the crew that you only hear in the background, their voices in the back.
Yeah.
In The Wind Will Carry Us. He cut him out of the film because he was like, all right, you keep sleeping in, then you're not going to be in the movie.
Whoa.
And so he only really, is because he was mad. So like a lot of these real life things kind of affect how the film turns out. The Coker earthquake happened the night of Abbas Kiarostami's 50th birthday. He then went to go check on the children at Where's the Friend's House, which inspired when Life Goes On. He said that birthday was a turning point in his life because before that, he was very bitter, but he was so inspired and enamored by the people he had met while shooting in Life Goes On, particularly those running the antenna to watch the football games amongst the devastation, that it kind of pivoted his look on life. So his 50th birthday, the night of his 50th birthday is when the Coker earthquake happened.
So what Kaveh is saying is it's Abbas Kiarostami's fault for turning 50.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. From A Social History of Iranian Cinema, Kiarostami's films beget later films, and later films refer to earlier films. His characters, locations, and stories migrate from one film to another, making his films self-referential and creating an intertextual nexus that require a knowing audience to decipher. In this instance, Kiarostami has absorbed from traditional Iranian theatrical performances, particularly the Tazieh, the Shiite passion play. In Tazieh, the stage apparatus is made visible, the artificiality of acting and the separation of the actor from the part are acknowledged, the actors are stereotypes and do not evolve, and the fourth wall is broken and spectators are addressed directly. All things Kiarostami does as well. On the topic of distantiation, so creating a distance or shortening a distance between audience and between audience and performance, Kiarostami once said, "We are never able to construct truth as it is in the reality of our daily lives. We are always witnessing things from far away while we are trying to depict them as close as we can to reality. So if we distance the audience from the film and even the film from itself, it helps to understand the subject matter better. I discovered distantiation in Tazieh." He goes on to talk about his affection for breaking reality in the fourth wall and goes on to say, "This is exactly the opposite to what Hollywood is doing, which is brainwashing the audience to such an extent that it strips them away from any imagination, decision-making, or intellectual capacity in order to captivate them for 2 whole hours. In my films, there are always some breaks, such as when a prop assistant brings a bowl of water and hands it to an actor in the film. This gives the audience time to breathe a little and stops them from becoming emotionally involved and reminds them that, yes, I'm watching a film. And Through the Olive Trees, I always wanted to keep that distance between the reality of the scene and the reality of the subject matter. So Farhan, I ask you, as a filmmaker, in your film Tehranto, which we will one day cover and I will do an extensive interview with you, you have this recurring device where one of the characters is breaking the fourth wall and hearing the narrator speak. Mm-hmm. And if you're listening to the way Kiarostami talks about films and how he always wanted to give these breaks in the drama, and he wants the actors to have a moment to breathe and have a moment where they realize they're watching a film, one might look at those scenes from Tehranto and be like, oh, these are clearly nods to Kiarostami's filmmaking. This is an Iranian director who is making a little nod and wink to this process of breaking the fourth wall, which is clearly a device by Iran's most prolific filmmaker. How would you address those questions? Were you inspired in these moments of breaking the fourth wall by Kiarostami's filmmaking or Tazieh playwriting or the distantiation, the Brechtian process? Expand on a little bit of thinking of what you did in that film.
So before I answer, I would like to know what you think.
Okay, knowing you now, I realize that you've become much more. I mean, I think you were a fan of Kiarostami in terms of giving him his due respect, but I think you've become much more keenly observant participant of his filmmaking, as I have through the process of making this podcast. So I don't know, what year did you shoot the film, Tehranto?
2019.
I don't know if 2019 you were so acutely aware of Kiarostami's process of distantiation and references to Tazieh's playwriting that you were like, oh, I'm doing this because I want to do a reference to Kiarostami breaking the fourth wall. I just think, knowing your sense of humor, it was more than likely something that amused you as a filmmaker and something you wanted to bring to kind of force the levity and the comedy to the forefront in some of the more dramatic scenes to level it out. I think it matches more your tone and sensibility and not as a specific reference to Kiarostami.
I think that's an excellent answer. Okay, so I actually hadn't seen a single Kiarostami film when I shot Tehranto.
Okay, see, I was right. Okay, there we go.
I was partially holding off because I didn't want it to influence my decision making in making Toronto, which is why I was also smiling when you said what you did about Kiarostami not watching a lot of other films because he didn't want it to influence him. I do think that the nexus of why I broke the fourth wall, Kiarostami breaks the fourth wall, Panahi breaks the fourth wall, and a lot of those traditional plays break the fourth wall. I think the nexus of that actually comes from a cultural place for us because storytelling is a massive part of who we are as a culture. And the way that we tell stories in Iranian culture is that we will break the fourth wall as we're telling stories, right? I don't know if this was the same for you when you were growing up. I have memories of my parents telling us stories, and as they would tell us stories, sometimes they would weave in the names of people we knew, or they would like sidebar it and introduce and infuse elements of a real life into it. My one uncle would do this constantly, where he would just come up with stories on the spot, and he would make the hero of the story one of us, or he would be like, and what color is the door? And then one of us would be like, green. And they'd be like, and the green door did that, right? So for me, Toronto was kind of doing a bit of that, where the narrator in the film is supposed to be an aunt or an uncle telling you this bedtime story. And the one character is able to hear that, oh, wait, this aunt or uncle is doing this. So it's kind of that channel between the real world and the fictional world.
Right, yeah.
Every time that channel is opened by the narrator infusing a new perspective into the film, it's heard the other way by one of the characters.
Cool. Thank you for that. One more thing. Actually, I'm going to do two more things. Another quick correction corner, just because I had learned it during this process. Farhad Karadman, who played the director in And Life Goes On, he couldn't drive. So when Kiarostami offered, remember he's an accountant in real life. So when Kiarostami offered him the role, Farhad told him he can't drive, and Kiarostami essentially gave him like rapid driving lessons. I mean, you could say quote unquote a crash course, although you don't want to say that about driving. And in the footage they start watching, he'd only had like a few days worth of driving lessons. But Kiarostami would watch the footage and go, I like it because the look on his face, he's actually nervous because he's not a good driver, but it looks like he's anxious in the car. So anytime you see that look on his face of Farhad driving, he looks anxious. It's because he's not a good driver. But Kiarostami liked it because it made him look nervous about the events of what's going to happen in the results of the earthquake. So, and actually the very first scene they had shot was the driving up to the toll booth, and it was day one, and Farhad couldn't drive yet at that point. So in that scene when Farhad drives up to the toll booth and like gives the ticket and keeps going, that car is being pushed by crew members. He's not even driving. Last thing I'll say about behind the scenes trivia, and then we can move forward. It was the first Iranian film to receive U.S. distribution, as Miramax had picked it up. But then after a short run with zero ads or promotions, Miramax dropped the film from distribution. Jonathan Rosenbaum, a critic who we've mentioned in the past who loves Kiarostami films, had said this. One of the major art house programmers in Chicago tried to book the film only to be told it wasn't available because Miramax was withdrawing it from distribution. It's too bad Miramax doesn't see this film for what it is. Many critics would simply accept Miramax's judgment, and the greatest of all Iranian filmmakers isn't worth bothering with, and write instead about one of its inferior offerings whose ad campaigns had already burned into our retinas. And in that, he's referring to Pulp Fiction, which had come out the same year. Miramax had distributed Pulp Fiction. Rosenbaum had called the film a must-see. He gave it a 3 out of 4 stars. And with that, we can move to critical reactions. Critical reactions. It was the nominee of the 1994 Palme d'Or at Cannes. In 1996, it was the nominee for Best Foreign Language Film at the Chicago Film Critics Association. It was chosen by Cahiers du Cinéma in France as one of the 10 best pictures of 1995. And it was included amongst 1,000 movies you must see before you die, edited by Steven Schneider. Deeper analysis. You want to go first? Do you have any thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, I have some stuff. There are 2 young women in this film who are especially a little feisty. The first one is when we see her at the beginning of the movie in the casting scene. She's like, when he's like, oh yeah, what's your name? Do you want to be in the movie or whatever? And she's like, hey, are you actually going to let us see it this time? And he's like, wait, what? And she's like, well, every time you come here, you make a movie. We don't get to see it. And he's like, well, no, we're going to distribute it. Don't worry. She's like, yeah, you keep distributing it to places that we can't actually see it.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, do you guys want to be in the movie or not? And then all the kids are like, yeah, we want to be in the movie. And then she's like, only as long as you show it to us. Only as long as you show it to us. And then a bunch of the other people are like, yeah, as long as you show it to us, whatever. And then the director starts laughing because she's like essentially started a little revolution amongst the group.
Yeah.
And then the second one is the main girl in the film who is constantly pushing back against the clothing that she wears, calling the husband sir.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying fiery in the sense of like, oh, they're sassy, they're this, they're that. I just mean in the sense of like contextually, you have these two young women that are pushing back against these men of authority, right? One of them specifically about the way that she's dressing and the way that she's talking to other men.
Yeah.
So have you heard of someone by, and both of them, what are their names? They have the same name.
The character's name?
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Tahire.
Oh, Tahire. Yeah. Okay. Who's the other Tahire then?
The other Tahire is the one at the beginning of the movie who's like, you can only film us as long as you'll show it to us.
I didn't realize her name was Tahire.
Yeah. That's what I had to go back and double check this morning because I had written that it was, but I wanted to confirm.
Okay.
So have you heard of a poet named Tahire?
No.
Who at one point was also known as Khuratul Ain.
No. That sounds more familiar than Tahire does. But no, I'm not familiar with her work.
So Tahire she was a prominent Babi, and before that, she was the daughter of a Muslim scholar, a guy named Muhammad Salah Barghani, who was a prominent Islamic scholar in the town that they lived.
Okay.
And they would have regular meetings with all these different Islamic scholars and sheikhs and mullahs who would get together and deliberate meanings of surahs from the Quran. And Tahira used to hide either around the corner, behind the curtain. Like she would hide and listen in on their discussions.
Okay.
And then one day she actually jumped in on the discussions and basically schooled everybody. And everyone's minds were blown that this woman like pushed back on everyone. She spoke in front of them. She blew them all away with her knowledge and was actually left them all dumbfounded.
Right.
And on top of that, she took off her veil.
What era was this?
She refused to wear it. This was in the 1800s.
Okay.
So she was born it's either 1814 or 1817, it says.
Okay. Yeah.
She was executed at the age of 35.
Okay.
So she was always known as being this person who was very well read, pushing for justice, and famously she refused to wear the hijab and all these things, again, in the 1800s, right?
Right.
And she was also a poet. And a lot of the poetry that she wrote is about almost this love, but it's not a romantic love. It's like a spiritual love for the founder of the Babi faith. And so to me, it's interesting that you have this character who is also pushing back against the idea of wearing these clothes or those clothes and addressing the men as sir and all this stuff. And she's involved in this storyline of unrequited love, which draws from Sufi poetry about the nightingale and the rose, which also ties into Tahir's story in a lot of ways.
Right.
So for the listeners, I highly encourage you all to go out there and look into some of her work. She notably has this poem, I think it's called Chehre Be Chehre, which the whole poem is about writing about her love and her admiration for this spiritual leader, the prophet founder of the Babi faith, who she had never met. And she's talking about wanting to see him and wanting to be with him and be in his presence and learn from him and all these things, which to me is almost kind of the inverse of what's happening here, where you have Hossein who's constantly trying to go after Tahire and be like, I want to do this for you. Like, I want to respect you. I want to do these. Like, I love this about you, all these things. So I just thought it was a really interesting parallel. And knowing about Kiarostami's love and admiration for poetry, especially for women poets, I think it's highly likely that he, at the very least, was able to draw these parallels. For sure. Yeah, 100%. Cool. There's a couple other ones that I have, but why don't you hit me with a few and then we can come back to a couple of my other ones. I learned this one from the interviews from the Criterion collection, but Godfrey Cheshire, like Cheshire Cat, Godfrey Cheshire, he's a journalist and critic who'd spent a lot of time with Kiarostami interviewing him.
You can often see him in a lot of set photos with Kiarostami, specifically on the set of Life Goes On and this film Through the Olive Trees. And in an interview with Kiarostami, Godfrey once asked if he could consider the earthquake as a metaphor for the real-life revolution. And Kiarostami agreed, adding that by the time he was making his third film Through the Olive Trees, he was thinking a lot about the aftermath of the revolution and how a lot of people thought that the revolution was going to do away with classism. And so people had hoped that the revolution would happen and this division between classes would eradicate. And the divisions between people existed and continued, and it didn't go anywhere. And people fantasized about going with the revolution, but it didn't. So he said to Godfrey Cheshire that he was reflecting upon this during Through the Olive Trees and during Close-Up specifically. And so I think there's one element you could look at this, that he's looking at classism, but he's kind of also, it kind of goes against this notion and the criticism that Kiarostami is oblivious to this. You know, we talked about this in And Life Goes On, how a lot of his most ardent critics, maybe something out of jealousy, some of them are film critics, directors, they said that he looks down upon these villages through tinted glasses, and that he, you know, he's using Vivaldi, for instance, and it's kind of, well, he's losing his Iranian roots. But this film sort of signifies to me that he clearly was thinking a lot about these things. He was thinking about classism a lot and the division between cultures within the Iranian community. And he was going to go about addressing it in his own way. We've talked about how Kiarostami was a relatively apolitical filmmaker. He didn't want to get involved. And in hearing his son talk about how he wasn't really even a cinephile, he wasn't really a filmmaker who was going to go out there and send a message. He was going to explore the things that interested him and communicate his feelings through those films and let people interpret them how they wish. And I think in a way, this film is a response to the criticism that he was out of touch with Iranian society and with what the classes are created. And I think he was a very thoughtful director who thought about these things a lot, but wasn't going to go out and make an interview and explain himself. He would just let his art speak for himself. And I think this is one film that speaks a lot about that.
And to your point, he is absolutely showing us that. He shows multiple times in this film that the director character is mistaken. And he's trying to push his own view of things onto the movie.
Yes.
Down to the way that people are dressed, the way that people speak, the way that they refer to each other. Even him trying to have conversations with that young girl in the back of the truck and asking her name. And they're like, hey, that's actually not okay here. That's actually really inappropriate for you to do.
And we've talked a lot about how problematic Kiarostami was in certain areas. And there's a whole thing we could do about the truly problematic stuff. But even the things when we talk about ripping up the photo for the child to cry. But then by films later, like almost 10 years later, he's now kind of coyly telling this Hossein guy. It's almost like he was evolving a bit in his own way and becoming more understanding of maybe being a better person to some degree. And some of that is shining through. But again, he would go about it doing it his way. He's not going to kowtow to the criticisms against him.
Yeah. A little corrections corner then, going back to The Wind Will Carry Us.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about how his relationship with that little boy in that movie, there's a moment in that movie where he berates the little boy. And then later he's like, oh, we're good, right? Like, my bad. We can move on now, right? But the kid holds it in, right?
Yeah.
He's hanging on to it.
Yeah.
So when you see that, I think that is almost a reflection on his relationship with Nemadzadeh in Where's the Friend's House, where he rips this photo in front of him. And I think it actually did have an effect on him, right? And he's coming to terms with that, which he must have resolved it because now he's back and working with him here, right? And there's a Q&A that he does at the Aga Khan where he mentions that he got back in touch with the kid and they had some long discussions and they're good now and all this stuff.
I'll just wrap up my deeper analysis by saying, to expand on that, this kind of goes back to The Wind Will Carry Us. I find that Kiarostami is fascinated with the indomitable spirit to constantly want answers from a life that might not ever provide you the answers you want. And maybe the feedback to somehow some of the critics who complain about his endings, present company included, or even expect him to speak up about the government, to say something against the Islamic Republic, which he never did. not in the way people want it anyways. And a lot of his art is about the struggle to get some sort of completion, to get some sort of resolve, whether it's your film or the love of your life, to just give you an answer. Mm-hmm. And sometimes life doesn't offer those offerings to you. So what does it mean when you have to live your life without those answers? And I think that's a big part of what he was really fascinated with exploring in this film. So I will leave it at that. You have more deeper analysis?
Yeah. It's going back to the unrequited love. Mm-hmm. Do you know about the nightingale and the rose? Like, do you know about that analogy?
No.
So the analogy of the nightingale and the rose, it's this reference made in a lot of Sufi poetry.
Okay.
And it's this idea that there's a nightingale perched on a tree and it's singing its love for the rose. Have I brought this up before on the podcast?
No, I don't think so.
Where the nightingale is basically lamenting over the rose and singing its heart and soul out about how much it loves the rose and it wants the rose to take flight and fly away with it. Mm-hmm. And no matter how much it sings and it pleads with the rose to fly away with it and to even just answer him, the rose stays still and it stays silent.
Yeah.
So to me, I think the relationship between Hossein and Tahireh is a lot of that.
Yeah, of course.
The whole point of their relationship is that he's singing and he's pleading with her and she can't give an answer.
Yeah.
And I actually, if the movie had ended and we never saw or heard what the response was, or that she ever did respond, I would have actually been just as content, funny enough. And a lot of times I don't like open endings, right? But in this case, I think that would have kind of been the point, is that it's like the story of the nightingale and the rose. That the point of it is that you are waiting for this release that never comes.
Yeah.
And I actually commend Kiarostami for finding a way to give that release without doing it obviously.
Yeah.
Because we see at the end that she gives him an answer.
Yeah.
But as an audience, we don't know what the answer is. So Kaveh, now I'm asking you, what do you think was her answer?
Okay, I have two things I want to say about this. One is, I think it is, in the world of the film, we never get a full answer and we don't know for sure, because unless we've seen it outright, we don't 100% know. But I think it's very strongly implied that the answer was positive.
Yeah,
for various reasons. I think the answer was that she says yes, that she will marry him. And so much so that I actually made a note that I was going to put this in critical reactions, but I literally made a note to say, if Farhan asks you about the ending, read this out loud. Because critic Jim Emerson, who writes for the Roger Ebert's official website, rogerebert.com, said, in the celebrated final shot, lasting many minutes, he follows her down a hillside through a grove of olive trees and into a distant field before she finally acknowledges his presence. They are mere dots on the screen, but there is no ambiguity, despite what some critics will tell you about the outcome. No ambiguity. The dots stop, the music ceases, then resumes, shifting into a celebratory mode. Hossein runs back towards the camera, still positioned high on the hillside, cutting through the grass and falling down. You have to be deaf, dumb, and blind not to understand what the film is saying at this point. It's a lovely, thrilling ending. It's just not ambiguous, and I don't know why some insist on reading it that way. And I like that this guy's taking a pretty hard stand. I agree with him. I think it's a happy ending because of the music and the reaction. But it's just funny that, like, it's also like kind of like, it's up for debate. It's ambiguous, but I mean, it's also very.
I agree with him, but I think that there's like even 10% ambiguity there where someone could argue the opposite.
Yeah,
but I love how he's just straight up going to ad hominem, where he's like, if you don't agree, you're an idiot.
Yeah, exactly.
Which actually reminds me a lot of when Inception came out. So there were some critics who were like, clearly it's not a dream, and if you think it is, you're dumb.
Yeah.
I was like, what?
Yeah. But yeah, so that's, and you,
All
so
right,
you agree.
chill.
You agree for the same reasons though, like because of the music and his reaction, running. Like I think he'd be sad. What would be his rush to run back? I think the run back is, you got the good news. You're running back. Like otherwise it'd be like a slow, sad shuffle, right?
Yeah.
So yes. Shall we move on?
Oh, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Kiarostami is very purposeful in how he does certain things, right?
True.
Like he'll make people redo an entire take if one thing is not the way that he specified it. Hossein offers Tahir tea upstairs.
Yeah.
And she doesn't take it. And so he puts out a table for her, puts the tea down.
Yeah.
And then he takes his own tea and he puts it on the windowsill. When she leaves, the tea is still there.
Okay.
And he hasn't drank his tea either because he did his scene, right?
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
He takes her teacup and he pours it into the flower pot.
Right.
And he takes his own teacup, takes it down the stairs and pours it into the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that is? What do you think is the significance there?
I don't know. What, do you have a theory?
The only thing I can think of is it's kind of like a representation of worthiness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that can make sense.
That it's almost like her tea can be used to nourish this plant and continue to give the plant thriving life.
Yeah.
And it's up high above everybody and it's in this nice spot and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But then his tea, he takes it away from that ledge. He brings it downstairs and he pours it into the dirt. I think he's kind of humbling himself.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. Good call. Best scene. Why don't you tell me your best scene is?
Okay. So it's the first time that he's pleading with her when they're upstairs. When we see them upstairs and it's the two of them together for the first time. And it's because we've been setting up the lore around this couple, right? Or around these two characters between Hossein and Tahir, where we know that Hossein is interested in Tahir and Tahir, we don't exactly know how she feels. And that first time that we're seeing him pleading with her is just so sweet to see. And it's so innocent, and it's the first time that we start to get a little bit of cathartic release. But in getting that cathartic release, it actually almost makes the tension worse because she's not answering.
Yeah.
And it's very much a representation to me of the nightingale and the rose. So for that, I loved it.
I think I'm talking about the same scene too, where I really liked how he does a take where he's like the angry husband saying like, hey, don't pour water on his head. Why are you pouring water on his head? And he's like, okay, cut. And he goes back upstairs and he goes, if I was married to you, I wouldn't really be that angry. I would, he's like, I'm acting when I act like,
he's like, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Like, I thought that was really sweet because he's like trying to be like, that's just me being an actor. I hope you don't think that I'd be like that as a husband. If I was your husband, I would be, if we were married, I just want my wife's happiness and all that. I thought that was my favorite scene because of how sweet it was, which I think is like the same scene essentially because he keeps going back up and down.
It is the same scene. It's the same scene.
But following that, and it's also still part of the same scene, is the tension of the book pages and whether or not she'll flip the pages of the book to admit that she loves him back. Which is also the next time he goes up. I think those were in conjunction, like coupled together, my favorite scene of the film.
The book part was definitely a favorite moment for me in the film.
Yeah.
But the first time he's up there, which is when he's like, hey, I'm sorry I was talking to you like that.
Yeah.
I'm just acting.
Yeah.
And,
so good.
And then he gets into it. That was my favorite one because it was the first time, and for that it was especially special.
Yeah, I hear you. That's when I wrote it down. Like as I was watching the movie, I made that note. I would just say also as a follow up, the whole last 12 minutes from the moment she gets off the car to walk and he follows her, and then you notice the director's watching them. Like all of those 12 minutes is like masterpiece filmmaking.
Yeah, that was my runner up.
Least favorite scene. I'll go first just because I don't really have a good one. I kept trying to think of one, and I just think this film is so great. Maybe one or two too many takes on the whole sock scene. Like if I had to say, but this is me. I feel like they do that sock scene with the water one or two too many times to the point where nothing is necessarily gained from two or three of those takes. Like what they probably do it 6 to 8 times, I think.
There's a lot.
And that'd be my only like least favorite scene is like you could probably the part where he's putting his socks on, you could remove 2 of those takes.
For me, and I struggled to find a least favorite scene to be completely honest, but it's the POV scene where it's the POV through the dashboard and the teacher's in the seat next to her.
Yeah.
Mostly because I didn't quite understand the point of the scene.
Yeah, I hear you.
So that could, maybe I'm wrong, but the fact that both of us didn't really catch what the point of the scene was or if there was any deeper meaning to it. If you have thoughts on it, though, feel free to let us know.
Yeah. Damn, that's poetry. Do we probably have the same one?
Maybe.
I'm going to just read mine and you tell me if you agree.
Okay.
If homeowners marries homeowners, the rich married the rich, and the illiterate married the illiterate, nothing would work. It's much better if the illiterate marry the literate, and the rich marry the poor, and those without houses marry those without. That way we can all help each other out. If two people marry and end up with two houses, they can't live with their heads in one house and their feet in the other. This is the moment where Hossein is talking about his life philosophy to the director in the back of the truck.
Yeah, that's
and how he's frustrated.
The same one.
Yeah, it's a beautiful moment.
Yeah.
من فکر میکنم که اگه بخوان خونه دارا با خونه دارا ازدواج کنم، پول دارا با پول دارا، بی سوادا با بی سوادا، توی زندگی نمیشه. بهتره اگه با سوادا با بی سوادا ازدواج کنن، پول دارا با پول نداره ازدواج کنن، خونه ندارن با خونه دارا، که این یا هم دیگه رو بتونن رو به راه کنن. از نظر من این بهتره. اگه یه دو نفر اگه بخوام دوتا خونه داشته باشن با هم ازدواج کنن، خب این که نمیشه. سرشونو بذارن توی این خونه، پاشونو بذارن تو اون خونه.
I liked it a lot. And it's still very fitting to society today.
Yeah, I wrote, did Kiarostami just solve capitalism? Is the note I made.
Yeah. Well, and I love when the director responds, he's like, well, don't be ridiculous. They would just rent one of the houses. And then I'm like, oh yeah, there it is.
Yeah, but it encapsulates all the problems about modern society and capitalism voiced through one illiterate rural Iranian, which is great.
Who's really just regurgitating back Kiarostami's own philosophy.
Yeah.
I have some runner-ups for favorite quotes. This is just like something that I thought was funny, was when they're like, hey, get this lady's address. She's like, we don't have an address. We live behind that tree.
Yeah.
Like, that's their address, is behind that tree.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, there's a scene in the movie where the director character is telling the director character from the second movie that, you know, the dead in Pushta will respond to you. Mm-hmm. So he shows him that if you yell hello to the mountains, right, towards the direction of the rubble, of the ruins of the town, the echo will respond hello, right?
Yeah.
And then later, Hossein sees this, and Hossein says, the dead of Pushta have better manners than Tahireh. When you said hello, they gave you a reply.
Said hello back, yeah.
When I said hello thrice, she didn't reply once.
Yeah, that's a great moment.
And I thought that was really cool.
Favorite performance? Hossein, for me.
Yeah, Hossein.
Nitpicks, hot takes, and what aged poorly?
I have a few.
Go for it.
The masonry guy on the roof. Mm-hmm. I think that the actor couldn't act because he's smiling the entire time.
He's just happy
all
to
of
be
his lines.
It's really funny.
Yeah, and all of his lines are completely redubbed.
Yeah. Okay, that's funny.
And they like don't fit his lip flap at all. Like clearly this actor that they got who's doing the masonry on the roof, and he's like, well, what do you want me to do? I need to put the rocks there and I'll move them later. Blah, blah, blah. He's like, just relax. We'll deal with it. It'll be resolved. Mm-hmm. But you see the actor and he's just smiling the whole time and it doesn't fit at all.
That's really funny.
This is very, very nitpicky, but in that same scene, as Shiva goes to drive away, the shot is extremely underexposed.
Yeah, I saw that. Like when it was one of those shots and reverse shots too in the car with him.
Yeah.
What is that? What is up with that?
It's super underexposed.
It almost seems like a deleted scene, right?
Yeah, it's super underexposed. And so when they were optically reprinting the negative to a positive, they brightened the shot and you just see tons of grain, tons of film grain. And it's very noticeable.
Yeah.
And I don't like, but I can kind of understand why he did it, but I don't like that he'll berate his actors. And you'll be like, well, how many times did I tell you to do it like this or like that?
Yeah.
How many times did I tell you? And we know that he did that in Where's the Friend's House when he was making it with the scene with the photograph.
Yeah.
So it might actually be a reference to the way that he used to direct. But I certainly hope that it's not a reference to the way that he still directed at this point. Mm-hmm. Because I think that it's patronizing, it's condescending, and it's straight up really rude to say that to people you're working with.
Cool. Anything else?
That's it. What are yours?
Just a nitpick I had was the thing I mentioned earlier about maybe one too many takes, doing and redoing of the line. But what aged poorly, I don't know, a modern version of this is like, is her silence enough of a no? Like, you know, in looking at this with the 21st century, 2023 lens, is he harassing her? Is Hossein harassing her? There's a romanticized version of, oh, these are rural villagers and this is like takes place in the 90s and, you know, whatever. But like, I don't know, in 2024, that just seems like he's harassing her. I mean, I know it's supposed to be like, oh, she can't give an answer because whatever.
That's the thing that I think contextually it's a little different.
Yeah. But they're taking her silence as uncertainty. But I also think that, like, looking at this through a modern lens, you'd be like, dude, she doesn't want to talk to you. You're bothering her, you know?
But that would be us reading the scene with a 21st century Western mindset.
Right. It's called what aged poorly.
I know, but 30 seconds later, you see that you're wrong.
Yes. You mean when she gives the positive answer?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, again, we litigated the fact that you don't 100% know. And also, it's not 30 seconds later. He's been bothering her the whole film. Anyways.
All right, Kaveh. If that aged poorly, then that one critic who vehemently was like, you're an idiot if you think it's anything but a positive answer, is actually wrong.
Right. I'm just saying, this subject is called What Aged Poorly. Anyways, double feature lineup.
I think there's only one answer for this.
A triple feature lineup with the other two co-care films?
At the very, or if you can only do one, you do Life and Nothing More.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, you could be fun and do a triple feature lineup and play the co-care trilogy in reverse order. see how that reacts to the new audience. You know, maybe you do some sort of weird Inception or like Tenet thing. Of
That's
like,
funny.
First you see this film.
You go in instead of coming out.
Yeah. I just want to give also a shout out to this film that I don't get a chance to talk about at any other time. It's called Omar. It's a Palestinian film by Hani Abu Assad, which I saw at TIFF. I think it's like a 2015 film or something. But essentially it's a Palestinian love story about a Palestinian baker who frequently climbs the West Bank barrier to visit his sweetheart Nadia, who's a high school girl whom he intends to marry. So this idea of like unrequited love, it's a little bit of like West Side Story, West Bank story. He's trying to reach this woman that he loves and she's on the other side, so he has to always cross the border. It gave me shades of that. So if you didn't want to do the Coker trilogy, you could pair this film with Omar, which is a very sweet movie. Just wanted to give that a shout out. Could this be a modern Hollywood remake? I say no. I don't even think even doing this story without all the context of the other films, it just wouldn't be a remake of this film.
Yeah.
This film can't be done. You'd have to remake the whole Coker trilogy.
Yeah.
And even then, I don't think it would work. So, no is my answer. Is that yours?
Yeah, that's mine too. At the very least, I think you would have to remake the second one and then this one.
Final thoughts and grade. I'll give my grade first. As always, you give your grade and final thoughts, and I'll close off with my final thoughts.
Sure.
I'll just say it's an A. It's pretty nearly flawless film. I liked it so much more than I thought I would. It really completes the Coker trilogy and makes it feel like a trilogy in a way I didn't expect. And so, yeah, it's just an A for me.
Cool. I really like the film for the way that it really summarizes and closes off the trilogy. Even though Kiarostami himself doesn't consider it a trilogy, I think that it's, once you see all three of them, you really realize how much this ties them all together into one film. And as someone who is a sucker for the story of the Nightingale and the Rose, I really like that storyline was kind of front and center to the whole thing. The way that Kiarostami comments on his past work and his past directing style as well, or the commentary on post-revolutionary Iran with the idea that people thinking, oh, with the revolution, we'll do away with everything and we'll all be equal, only to see that, well, no, those who lost things just used their wealth and rebuilt it. And those who were poor remained poor.
Yeah.
That, I think, was also brilliant commentary and a brilliant way to show it on screen without the government necessarily cracking down on him for it. For all those reasons and reasons that we've given throughout this episode, I give the movie an A-. I really liked it. A- is a pretty solid score for me. Okay, so that means that our Cinema Rex average rating for this film is an A. So Where's the Friend's House got a B++. Life and Nothing More got a B. And Through the Olive Tree got an A.
Wow. What Through the Olive Trees did was confirm and bring to a dramatic climax Kiarostami's perennial fascination with the nature of reality, with the fictive transparency of the real. Through the innocent act of role-playing by two non-professional quote-unquote actors, the mere reality of fiction makes an impossible love possible. Kiarostami's gentle gaze is fixed on the borderline of that impossibility, where fact and fiction, reality and fantasy, and fulfillment negotiate the terms of respective enchantments. In Through the Olive Trees, Tahir's prolonged silences and Kiarostami's long takes map out uncharted territories, not just within the multitudes of pathways and trails of Coker, but the multitudes of pathways and trails of human emotion. Where nothing is real and yet nothing is fabricated, the beauty of this world is that perhaps everything simply just is. Farhan, thank you for all that you do. You know how I feel about you.
Kaveh, thank you for all that you do. I love you.
To our listeners, thank you for listening in. Tell them where they can email us or where they can find our Instagram, Farhan.
You can find our Instagram at CinemaRex Podcast on Instagram. And you can email us at cinemarexpodcast@gmail.com.
Yes, if you have movie suggestions or thoughts or comments or criticisms or want to give Farhan a hard time, feel free to do so on those two spots. To our listeners, Be'omide Didar.
Bye. Music for Cinema Rex was written and performed by Sohail Sadinejad.